Today we are working on this project, the mini crotch rocket build. I know it took a kind of little break from this thing, but we're finally back working on it. So the next thing we need to do with this project is handlebars and foot pegs. Then once we do that, then we need to add a couple more things to the frame. Then the frame is ready to completely disassemble this thing, which should not be that hard. This thing's tiny. And weld the whole frame together and then reassemble it. So first thing I'll start working on is handlebars. I'm not exactly sure the kind of stance I'm really looking for. I'm not really sure. Because this thing is more like a crotch rocket, I don't know if they should be like more down here. You know, like a typical crotch rocket. I don't know if there should be more like cruiser style or something in between, but I'm not really sure about that, but we'll kind of figure that out in a little bit. But first thing we need to do is figure out a way to attach the handlebars to the triple clamps like a normal mini bike or motorcycle would use. in place. I decided to go with the lower style handlebars because this is a mini crotch rocket. I feel like I need to stick with the mini crotch rocket look. So I decided to have them a little bit lower. It wouldn't make sense having the handlebars like way up here. I think that would look ridiculous. So I think this works pretty well. Now, the next thing we need to work on is foot pegs. Now these are off of an old project, a project that I gave up on, built it a couple of years ago, and never really worked that well. I kind of gave up on it. So I decided to cut these off of that project to use for this project. Now, I'm not really sure like what height I should weld these at because I don't want them to be like super high to where I'm like riding it like this, but I don't want to have them super low and have it to where I feel like I can't lean into a corner without my foot hitting the ground. I don't want to have to like pick my foot up every time I lean this thing into a corner. So I'm just gonna guess at what height they should be, tack them in place. I'm gonna like see how it feels, lean a little bit back and forth, see if my foot gets close to the ground, and if we need to adjust them up and down, we can always do that. Alright, so the foot pegs feels like it's a comfortable position. It's not too high, it's not too low. When I lean into a corner, my foot gets a little close to the ground, but not terribly close. I can just kind of do that. But I can lean this thing pretty far. So I'd say, yeah, I'd say it's good. Let's move on to something else. Let's actually, let's pull that table in here. And put this thing up back on the table, so therefore it's a little bit easier to work on. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit more tubing in here to kind of fill this out and give this just a little bit more character. I'm thinking something like this. I'll add two pieces like this and another piece like that. That's going to kind of look like cross bracing, and you know, it'll strengthen the frame and give this thing just a little bit more character. Yeah, something like that. Alright, got some more tubing added to both sides. Really like how that turned out. Also got the oil cooler mount installed. Now, I was thinking of adding a couple more things here and there, like the headers and mufflers and battery box. Battery box is going to have to go under the seat somehow before welding the frame together, but there's enough room for everything. The reason is because I want to make sure we don't have to modify anything to make room for the battery box and headers and mufflers and all that kind of stuff. That's the only two things we have left that's going to kind of be hard to install on here, but I think there's enough room on here to do that stuff, and we don't have to do that stuff right now. So I think it's finally time to start working on disassembling the entire frame, so therefore we can weld the frame together, so therefore it's not just simply tacked into place. So shouldn't be that hard disassembling this. This thing is tiny, and there's not that many parts to it. And just like that. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm curious how much this weighs. Doesn't feel like that much. I want to say maybe 10 pounds? I don't know, 10, 15 pounds, I think. I have a bathroom scale. Let me go grab it. Alright, I grabbed the bathroom scale. I want to say 10, 15 pounds, but let's find out. 22 pounds. I was a little off, but still, 22. Is that sounds like a lot. Is that a lot? That sounds like a lot. I don't know. Compared to what this engine, compared to the frame that this engine came off of, 22 pounds is like a featherweight compared to how heavy the other bike was. So, yeah, let's finally weld this thing together. Shouldn't be that hard. This frame is tiny. Alright, so I'm really curious to see how much this engine weighs. So we got the bathroom scale. Let's finally weigh this thing. The frame was, what was that, 22 pounds? Then the engine is 102 pounds. Wow. Yeah, why is this thing so big and so heavy? It's a 250cc engine, but this thing's massive, and it went, yeah, 102 pounds. To put it into perspective, my Ninja 650 engine weighs, I think it was 135 pounds, and that's a 650. This is a 250. So, yeah, I don't know why this thing is so physically big and it's so heavy. So the next thing we have to weld is the triple tree. I'm gonna leave the forks on, as well as I found this that fits in here. I'm gonna leave this stuff on just to try and limit the distortion from welding. Alright, so the frame is done. It's all welded together and I cleaned it, so that's done. Now before we start reassembling this thing, we need to do a couple things to the engine first. First, I want to clean this. It's kind of covered in mud. Unfortunately, there's a lot of aluminum corrosion on this engine. The aluminum's starting to corrode. It's coming through the paint on this engine, so I want to clean it and try to get this thing looking just a little bit better. And second, we need to fix a bolt that is broken off of here. So as you can see, one of these bolts is broken. Alright, so that's good. So I always thought that one of these bolts was broken off of in here, but apparently it was just missing and this is full of dirt. So I'm gonna actually go grab a tap of this size and see if I can clean these threads out a little bit better. Alright, so thankfully that was a lot easier fix than I thought it was going to. I thought we were going to have to like drill in there, try to extract the broken bolt, but apparently the bolt was just missing and this was just full of dirt. So, super easy to fix. Now, unfortunately, when I took the intake boots off, I noticed on the intake side of this engine, the intake was totally corroded on the inside. It had all that aluminum white dust that, you know, builds up on aluminum whenever it starts corroding, as well as the valves have a ton of rust on them, and the intake valve on this cylinder was stuck open. So, yeah, that's not good. So, now, remember when I first got this engine, we did get it running, but that was over a year ago. This engine's been sitting outside underneath the tarp for over a year, and this is what happens when something like this, when an engine sits outside underneath the tarp for a long period of time. This is what happens. Stuff that's not protected, the aluminum starts corroding, all the unprotected steel just starts getting rust everywhere, and then it just causes havoc on stuff like this. So now I did spray a bunch of PV Blaster down the intake, the spark plug hole. I took the spark plugs out and sprayed a bunch of PV Blaster on the exhaust ports and slowly turned the engine over, and it did free up everything. The valve that was stuck is not stuck anymore, and everything seems to be working, but there's still a bunch of rust on the valves, and I'm not sure if they're gonna get a good enough seal to get this thing running. So right now we have two options. Option A is just take a gamble, hope that the PV Blaster was enough to free up everything, hope that this thing has good enough compression and doesn't need a top-end rebuild, start working on reassembling this thing, putting the engine back in the frame, and continuing with wiring. That is option A. Option B is probably what we should do, is do a top-end rebuild. Take the cylinders off, take the jugs off, let's clean the valves, let's lap the valves, let's clean everything, make sure everything's good. Let's check the cylinder walls, possibly hone the cylinders, check the piston rings, pistons, all that kind of stuff. That's probably what we should do, but I don't want to have to do that if I don't have to. So right now, I'm going to take a gamble and just hope that the PV Blaster was enough to free up everything, hope that this thing works with no issues and all that kind of stuff, and I'm going to start working on reassembling this and putting it back in the motorcycle frame, simply because it's not that hard. Worst case, if it does, if we finish it, try to get it running, and this thing doesn't have good compression, worst case, if we do have to do a top end rebuild, it's not that hard to take the engine out of the frame. It's a tiny frame. There's not that many parts to it, and it wouldn't be that hard to do a top end rebuild if we need to. So I'd rather not do a top end rebuild if we don't have to. So I'm gonna start working on reassembling this thing. Let's clean the intake boots, put them back on, and start working on getting this engine back in the frame. Alright, so it's not even 10 minutes later. I put the intake boots back on, I cleaned the spark plugs, put the spark plugs back in, and I was curious to see, does this thing feel like it has compression? And you can hear the valves leaking, and this thing feels like it has zero compression. Listen to this. This cylinder is the worst. This one's pretty bad, but you can hear it leaking from this one the most. So it looks like we have no other option but to do a top-end rebuild. Let's just do it. Let's just do it and get it done. So I'm not sure why I took this cylinder head off first. This was the one that wasn't leaking either that bad or at all. And these valves look fine. They have a little bit of carbon buildup, but that's totally normal for an engine like this. The piston, as far as I can tell, looks fine. There's no marks or anything. Still haven't looked at the cylinder walls yet to see if those are fine. Those are good. As far as the valves on this side, they actually look fine. But let's take apart the cylinder head that was the worst. So I'm looking at these valves, and from here, at least, they look fine. Aside from a little bit of carbon buildup, I don't see any gaps. I don't really see anywhere where they could be leaking. So hopefully we didn't tear into this engine for nothing. But who knows? They could still be leaking, and I just can't really see it from, by just looking at it. So hopefully it turns out to be the valves and not something even worse. So let's start taking these valves off and inspecting them, see if we need to either clean them or if we need to lap the valves. So as far as the cylinder walls, I circled this engine over, inspected the cylinder walls, and those look fine. There's no scoring, there's no marks, so that's at least good. As far as the piston rings, I'd really rather not take these off because the further I tear into this engine, the more stuff I have to buy. So as far as the piston rings, I'm just going to assume that they're good. Let's check the valves. If those are clearly leaking, then that's our culprit, and we can just lap those, and that'll hopefully solve the issue. After many hours of lapping these valves, I got them in a much better condition than they were. You could tell that they were pitted pretty badly and they were not sealing that great. I also was able to clean up the exhaust ports and everything. There was a lot of carbon buildup on those, and I wasn't able to get all the valves perfect. There's still a couple pits on the exhaust valves where the sealing surface is, but it's not all the way across the sealing surface. It's like a little bit less than half of the sealing surface is pitted, and I wasn't able to get them perfect, but at least they are in a much better condition than they used to be. It's really good that I did this. So now I know that doing this, it's going to throw the valve clearances off, so I did find a valve shim kit that hopefully works with this engine. Basically, I just took the valve shims, measured the outer diameter, and it was like 7.78 or something like that millimeters. And I just looked for a valve shim kit, 7.78 millimeter, and I was able to find one for $60. So I bought it, so therefore we can re-shim the valves and get those back into spec, because I know doing this kind of throws that stuff off. So right now it's kind of a waiting game, waiting for the head gaskets to get here, so therefore we can reassemble this engine. eBay says that they're going to get here within a week. So right now is basically all we can do is put the valves back in the cylinder heads, and then that's it for this video until we get the head gaskets. One down, one to go. That wasn't so bad. Just like that, they're both reassembled and ready to go back on the engine, but like I said, it is now a waiting game, waiting for the head gaskets to get here in the mail. Now, eBay says that they're going to ship, that they're going to get here sometime within the next week. So, in the meantime, while we're waiting for the head gaskets to get here, I'm going to put all this stuff in the garage because it's less dusty in the garage. I don't want this stuff getting in the way, and it's, you know, it's pretty dusty in here. And I'm actually going to start working on the next video of the mini rock crawler build. Start working on lengthening the CV axles on that and getting it reassembled. So for now, while we're waiting for the head gaskets to get here, I'm going to put all this stuff to the side and start working on that video. And then once the head gaskets get here, then we can finish reassembling the engine, get the engine back in the frame, start working on headers, mufflers, and where the battery's gonna go. We gotta find a place for a battery on this tiny little frame. Not sure where that's gonna go. And then trying to see if we can get this engine running. So I guess that's gonna be it for this video. Thank y'all for watching. I'll see ya in the next video.